I'm chatting with Glenn Crytzer of the Glenn Crytzer Orchestra. Glenn, I've got to ask you first off, why big band? What got you into that?
Sure. Well, I was a classical musician. I was studying at conservatory, and I had gotten into swing dancing when I was in college, just for fun as a hobby. And I started getting more and more interested in that music, but I was a little frustrated because there weren't a great number of people, playing really the music that I wanted to dance to. There was a lot of other kinds of jazz and Dixieland and modern jazz and straight ahead stuff, but people really digging into sort of the repertoire of the late 20s through the mid 40s, in a really kind of stylistically authentic way. It wasn't there weren't many people doing it, and so I kind of took it up for fun at first, and I turned out to be pretty good at it, so it became a career.
Now, is it true that you were originally studying cello?
Yeah, cello and composition. So I was a classical composing major.
Wow. And then through Lindy Hop, it was a Lindy Hop, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you ended up with now being a band leader, composer, guitarist, banjoist, and singer. It's a bit of a
I do a
change.
little. It's a lot of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it is, and I feel like it's interesting to me because there's a certain amount of stuff that I bring over from classical music that I feel like that maybe that people who study jazz in school don't get that particular type of training, and so I think it's something unique that I bring to what I do. It's a kind of a different background.
Now, the influences that obviously are there with the band, the people that probably
Hmm.
influenced you, there's quite a big range, isn't it? I mean, you've got Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Bix Beiderbecke, Louis Armstrong, Cab Calloway. All these people are sort of, it's a huge chunk of time that those guys were producing music. Do you find that this gives you a huge sort of repertoire of stuff that you can base your show on?
I think it does, and I think, I mean, because it's funny. It doesn't seem to most people like that's a big era of time musically in terms of different stuff. If you're not into the genre, but in fact, it's quite a lot of different stuff, and we really separate it out. I mean, when we do 20s, we really do 20s. When we do mid 30s, we really do mid 30s. And so I think the goal is never to be sort of derivative of anybody. When we play a tune, we're not, unless it's a really famous solo or something like that even people at the time would have copied. We're not copying all the solos off the records and things like that. We're not trying to be a sort of recreation of records band, but at the same, we're also playing new arrangements and original music and stuff. So the idea is to kind of have our own sound, but through the filter of whatever era we're working within. So if we're doing 20s, it's our sound, but it's our sound as if we were a band in 1929, or our sound as if we were a band in 1939.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is you are actually writing music in that style. So that it's keeping the music alive. It's not only just playing other people's compositions, your sort of version of it, but the band are actually creating brand new music. Do you find that gets well received?
I think it is actually. I mean, I think there's a lot of interest right now in recreating the performance traditions, or not necessarily recreating, but keeping those performance traditions alive. But I think that the tradition of writing in that style, certainly just as valid as the tradition of performing in it. There's I think sort of a lot of people have this idea of like, well, if you're writing, you must have to write something that's brand new and that sounds like nothing anybody's ever heard ever before, like some new genre. But that's sort of a very 20th century classical music kind of ideal where everything has to be new, 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 new. Prior to the 20th century, people just wrote in the genre that was sort of handed to them, and things with it. So I think that's certainly viable for this early jazz, like finding ways to find your own personal voice through a genre that exists.
Now, how long's the band actually been in existence?
Well, it's been about 10 years now with the big band. It started out in Seattle when I lived out there,
Hmm.
and I moved to New York about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that, and then reformed the group in New York City.
Now, I know you've got some really, really good musicians in there. I mean, I've been watching some of the videos, and the guys are really, really into the music. Not just the music, but the image, the whole thing. They're brilliant, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really great to be able to work with people who are just so I don't have to explain to anybody in the band how to get it, how to sound like 1932. I just say, hey, this is a Chicago band from 1932, or this is a Kansas City band from 1937. If we're playing a cover, and then they get it, and it's really wonderful to work with people who not only have a high level of musicianship, but have a really like a very kind of refined palette as far as playing the subtlety of the music.
Now, the other thing I was fascinated by is the band has actually, well, your music has actually been featured in a couple of movies and a couple of TV shows as well.
Yeah, actually, we've had stuff in about maybe I don't know, a few dozen TV shows and films, and so some bigger placements than others, some more featured, some very background, 5 seconds here or there on a radio in a car in 1940 or something. I mean, very 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 small, and others more prominently featured. So yeah, it's great that people are kind of interested in what we're doing, and it's mostly the original stuff that gets featured because, one, it's quite expensive to feature, the music of Benny Goodman, and so, Artie Shaw, and so thanks Benny and Artie for keeping the prices high so we can also work today. And also, I think it's also an element of, if you're creating, a fictional story within that timeline, I think it adds something to it to also add, some music that is right in that style, but that is new and different. That just is like you're creating a new and different story in that timeline. So I think that complements well.
And that one of the things I know from talking to people around is to keep a 17-piece orchestra going isn't cheap. Obviously,
It is not.
that must cost an absolute fortune. I mean, going on the road and doing things like that, or even just going into the studio and recording. Do you find that there is enough to keep the band going?
Well, what we do is, the band has gigs that we work as a full band, and we have a new residency starting in New York that'll be twice a month. And then, we do a lot of stuff as well that's like, okay, people want to hire a 7-piece for their party or whatever. We have, books for smaller, not versions of the big band, because, you're not going to play, a full big band chart with 7 pieces. It just sounds silly. But sort of, the combo music from the same era, whether it's, doing California Ramblers type stuff from the 20s, or, like Benny Goodman, septet things from the 40s and things like that. So we do a lot of that stuff. I think the hope, for everybody is to get to the point where the big band is working so much that we're doing less and less of that stuff and more of just the full band. But yeah, it just takes really developing a large enough following. It's, kind of getting the word out about what we do, and people recognizing it and going, oh, this is really good. These guys are pretty darn good. So.
When you're out and touring, I mean, that there is a sound, a certain sound, certainly for the 40s, that lovely, I always call it creamy, that sort of lovely sound with the saxes and everything else coming in. Can you always get that, or are you, somewhat restricted sometimes depending upon the venue that you're in?
No, you can always get it. I mean, one of the things I think people don't realize is that, so what we do is we do the sound of the band. It's very much a part of the setup of the way that we play the music. A lot of people look as they show up at the venue and they go, well, what does the sound guy want to do? Oh, he wants to stick a mic here and here and here and here, and it kind of gets out of hand. And lots of people, playing with the bass amps and guitar amps and all of these things. And we look at the sounds, the microphone setup and all of that stuff as part of the music. And as a result of that, what we do is very acoustic. We use very few mics. We use no monitors on stage or anything like that, no bass amps, anything to drive the stage volume up. And so what we do is pretty consistent. It's just a question of, where you need to put the speakers in whatever room it is for what we're doing to be heard. And of course, there can be challenges, you're in a room that's just acoustically poor. But, my feeling is that those same challenges exist when you have all this technology and mics and stuff on stage. And actually, I think the more stuff that you add to it, the more it sort of makes those problems worse and kind of causes more problems. It just kind of compounds them.
Yeah.
So I think that the reason we're able to be pretty consistent, pretty much wherever we are, is that our setup is very minimal. So we rely very little on sound engineers or anything like that to create the sound that we create.
Now, the band, looking at them and yourself, you're quite a bunch of young guys. Do you find that helps? Because this music, it's pretty energetic, isn't it? I mean, it's not as though it's sort of laid back or anything.
Yeah, I think people like seeing a band with a lot of young faces in it playing this music because it really sort of people have seen lots and lots of big bands over the years where it's kind of all guys in their 70s and there's just not a lot of energy to it, and they're just tired, beaten down by the business. And we're still in the process of being beaten down by the business, so we still I think people like to see that. They see a new generation kind of taking up this music and not just paying it lip service. There's a lot of big bands out there that have young guys in them, but they're not really into this music. They're just kind of there because it's like, well, I got this. But everybody in this group is really passionate about the music, and I think that shows. And I think people are excited to see, a band of mostly young guys doing that.
Now, obviously, the thing that I've got to say is that there is a huge interest. I won't say revival because I don't think it ever really went away in the swing era, in the big band music scene, right the way across Europe and obviously in the States. Is this good for you? I mean, do you find that you are more accepted because of this sort of revivalist thing, if that's the right word?
Yeah, I think the revivals kind of go in waves. Like I remember, in the late 90s, there was sort of this swing revival that was, a lot of it wasn't swing. I mean, it was the swing revival, but a lot of it was sort of punk rock mixed with swing or rockabilly or, which are, I mean, I'm not putting those things down. They're just, they're just different things. But it kind of all got labeled as a swing revival. And then kind of when that died out, there was a little bit of a quiet period. And then the trad jazz thing has been, become very in the 20s thing that, when The Great Gatsby came out and all things like that, it kind of sparked an interest in that. So the 20s is really hot right now. And so I think those things kind of go in waves as far as like people being interested in, vintage culture and things like that. I think it can be a help. I think it can be a hindrance. It's certainly a help in that, like, it brings people around to what we do and gets them to check us out. I think the sort of kind of poppy nature of some of it can cause, what we're trying to do is really, we're trying to pay a lot of attention to detail. I mean, it's art. And I think a lot of times when things get very commercial, then people want to, they have a different expectation, I guess, of what someone like us does. And so that can be more challenging, or it maybe brings people around to what you do when they say, well, why don't you do it more like this guy over here who's doing pop music? And it's like, cool, but that's not what we do, So yeah. I think the waves are just, it's kind of part of the thing, and you just kind of ride them and, figure out how to make what you're doing work in whatever the current climate is.
Now, you released an album, Aint It Grand, last year.
Yeah. Yes.
I've got a couple of tracks from that which I'm going to play in this interview.
Great.
How easy is it to put a band in a recording studio? I mean, I used to be into Motown, and I know they had absolute crazy things that they used to do with drums and things like that in one room and bands in the other room. Do you find that with modern techniques you're able just to all bunch in and do it?
Yeah, I mean it's just the same way that we record pretty much the same way that they would have done it in the 40s. It's a very minimal microphone setup. It's really just all about the placement of the instruments within the room. There's not a lot of, we're not putting people in separate booths or anything like they do with most modern isolating stuff. I want that blended sound, and I think people are, you have to find the right engineer that gets what you want to do, because most people in the sort of audio world today, in the music recording world, and in the live sound world, don't really understand. They've been told this isolated sound is good, and it's like, well, it is if that's the sound you want to create. If you want this very blended sound, it's a very different approach to getting it. So the good news is, it requires a lot less in terms of setup, but it's the bad news is that there's fewer people that know how to do it. So it's sort of been a process for me to kind of learn to be my own recording engineer and to learn how to place mics and place the band around them and kind of handle all the different subtle details of it to keep getting a better and better sound for what we do. And so the goal is sort of to create, the sound of the recording should be kind of like the sound of an old record, but without all that scratchy record noise in the way. It should have that same kind of blend and balance. Because, really, look, Benny Goodman had a lot of money. Freddie Shaw had a lot of money. And if those guys had really wanted to record it by miking every instrument, they could have pushed for it. They didn't. And it wouldn't have. Benny Goodman walked into Radio City Music Hall in the early 1980s, and they had all these mics set up. He was going to play, and this is one of his concerts toward the end of his life, and he had all these microphones set up and monitors and all of this stuff, and Benny made them take it all away and leave 3 mics on the stage.
Wow.
And to me, that really says, these guys were very conscientious about how the microphones affected the sound and how they were playing with that, and so I think it's really important to respect that, because these are the guys that created this music, and they really had a certain feeling about how that stuff should be used because of how it affected the sound.
Yeah, I understand totally what you're saying, and that is the whole thing, isn't it? That the sound. You're on tour at the moment?
I am on tour as a guest artist. I'm in Spain with Enric Piedro's septet. Well, it's normally a sextet, but now I've joined them as a guest artist here for a couple of weeks. So it's a septet now.
And whereabouts are you? You're up in the northern bit, aren't you? The sort of.
Well, I'm just hanging out in Denia here, but we're going to be sort of all around this next week. This is my last week here, so we'll have been. Well, let's see. I guess when this airs, we'll have been in Murcia doing a recording this weekend here, and then we'll be. Let's see. We're heading up to Madrid. We're going to be Vitoria on Sunday and Madrid on Monday and Tuesday. And we've been sort of all around here. We were in Alicante and Alcoy last weekend. We were in up in Valencia, kind of making our way around.
Yeah. Gonna have to get you down the bottom bit where we are.
I think Murcia is as close as we're going to get on this one. Yeah. But yeah.
Next time we'll get you down on the Costa del Sol.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we got to play a couple of tracks. Are there 2 tracks which you think really sum up the band and the sound that you create, or is it just a case of just choose a couple?
Well, I think it might be nice to play a sort of a classic and an original, so people can kind of get the idea of hey, when we're playing the classics, you get a kind of comparison to what we sound like versus, maybe a recording they know, and then, kind of an original to kind of display what we're doing with that. Maybe it would be good.
Okay, perfect. That's what we'll do. Okay, Glenn.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your time over here and keep swinging.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Speak to you again, I hope. Take care now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.